Hey everybody, thank you for tuning into Sound Waves, and in this episode we're looking at a wonderful musical space for experimental music in Brooklyn, New York called Roulette. And today we have co-producer of the Roulette Tapes podcast, Susan James, on the show, and I'm really excited to bring her on. Susan, how's it going?
It's good. Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's nice to be here. And so yes, I'm happy to talk about Roulette. I have really just started working with Roulette a little more than a year ago, but it's a phenomenal space with amazing, phenomenal programming. And their mission really is to open up and hold space for emerging artists as well as more established artists to bring experimental work to New York City. The way that I got involved with Roulette was I was familiar with the venue and I liked what they were producing. And I really wanted to produce a podcast where I could feature interviews with the artists that were coming up on the calendar. And I didn't really know that it was going to be Roulette. I approached a number of different venues, sent letters and emails to different places looking for a partnership for a podcast. And it just happened to be with Roulette. Originally, the production grew out of my studies at Brick Arts Media, which is a media education program in downtown Brooklyn. And I needed a nonprofit arts center to sponsor me for those classes. And Roulette said, great, host a podcast for us. And so together with David Weinstein, we produce this podcast. We publish one every month. So it's not a frequent podcast that you would hear weekly. I was just given free reign at WKCR to fill 3 hours of programming time every Monday afternoon. And I was just grateful for the opportunity to get to know jazz and new music artists. I got to know them in the clubs themselves. I got to have them on air live with me in the studios of WKCR. So I really learned how to interview people there. And years later, when I decided to come back to music journalism, I basically got connected with Roulette, and it really just fell together. It was just really serendipitous.
Were there any interviews that stood out for you?
That was one of the first major artists that I interviewed at WKCR was Brian Eno. He was doing a piece at the World Trade Center in their winter garden, and he was doing a sound installation. So I got to interview him, and I was gracious. I was grateful to get the chance to speak with him and to speak with him at length. And we ended up corresponding back and forth for a number of years following that interview. My work with the Roulette Tapes has been really amazing so far. Just getting to know the artists that we're featuring on the podcast and who are featured artists at the venue. Most of them are given a residency or they have works that are commissioned. Roulette is one of the few concert halls which gives artists a really healthy guarantee. So they make sure the artists can sustain themselves while they're creating the work to be presented. It's not just a matter of saying, okay, you're going to get a cut of the door. Roulette actually gives guaranteed fees to all of their artists, and they have programs that are funded so they can create residencies so an artist can develop a work over the course of a year or do 2 or 3 works that year. And it's really one of the few venues that focuses on emerging artists, but will still bring in established voices of artists that have been around for 30 or 40 or 50 years, bring those artists in as well. So it's a cross-generational experience at Roulette. Producer Mitch Easter, who is a musician in his own right, of course, but he produced REM for maybe 3 or 4 recordings back in the early 80s. And I think I was 14, maybe, when I had been reading Rolling Stone magazine and following the work of REM as well as other artists. But I caught on that Mitch Easter lived down south. He lived someplace in North Carolina. So I literally called up directory assistants on my parents' home telephone, and I said, "Can you get me Mitch Easter? He lives in such and such town in North Carolina." And they found him and gave me the number. And out of the blue, total cold call, I called him up. I'm 14 years old, very precocious. Nobody told me this was a bad idea. So I said, okay, let me call him. And I was nervous, but I got him on the phone and I said, "Hi, I write a music column for my junior high school newspaper. Can I interview you?" And I interviewed him. And I don't remember if I used my parents' tape recorder. I think at the time you could connect your phone to the tape recorder. So I think I had recorded the interview, but if I didn't, I know I at least took really good notes and reported on the interview in my school newspaper. So that was probably the first bit of music journalism that I
Did
did.
that take you someplace where if you didn't get that interview, you wouldn't have gone, do you think?
You know, it's interesting that you say that. Now, in the year 2020, when I want to interview somebody, there's always this moment of anxiety where I'm sending someone an email. I just got their email address from the venue. So, I get their email address and I'm sending it from my personal email address, not a company email address. So I keep thinking, they're not going to take it seriously. They're just not going to take it seriously. But if I drop the name of the venue, and I'm saying I'm doing a podcast for Roulette, and I know you're coming up uh, in a couple of months, and in advance of your concert, we would like to have you as a guest on our podcast. And then I have to explain what the podcast is and give them a link to the podcast so they can listen to it before they say yes. And I feel like I have to kind of validate myself. Does that sound right? You know, I feel like I have to create credentials for myself so that I can be taken seriously. Now, I don't know if everyone feels that way, but even when I was 14 years old and I called up somebody and said it's for my school newspaper, just to have somebody take me seriously was a big thing. Now, when I was at WKCR Radio, it's a well-established radio, even though it's a college radio station. Once we started webcasting in the early 90s, we had listeners. I had people calling me on the air from Germany. You know,
Wow.
we had listeners all around the world listening to our radio shows.
Great. Do you have any shows coming up that you'd want viewers to check out today?
Yes. Okay. So right now, our current episode, our December episode, features Elliot Sharp. He is a guitarist and multi-instrumentalist, a composer, and a band leader. Elliot Sharp is just one of those artists that has been around for more than 40 years, producing cutting-edge music and collaborating with a number of other artists. So please check out guitarist Elliot Sharp. He is our December featured artist. Coming up in January, if all goes well, on Tuesday of this week, I'll be recording an interview with vibraphonist Joel M. Ross. And he is an emerging artist. He just released his second recording on Blue Note Records. And he's getting a lot of press and a lot of attention. And I'm just really pleased that he is one of our commissioned artists. He does have a residency at Roulette. I would just invite listeners to go to the Roulette website, because you can find the live stream performances that are happening now, and you can find in our archives the live stream performances that are happening this season, as well as footage from 1981, 1991, 2001. You can find audio archives from a number of artists.
Well, thank you, Susan, so much for being on the show. Thanks for turning everybody on to the Roulette Tapes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, guys, for watching. Please check out the Roulette Tapes. It's a phenomenal place to go for experimental music. And thank you for watching Sound Waves.